My last Megaman video was Maverick Hunter X, the PSP Classic in quotations, and how I thought it was a fun game. It was a quite faithful yet different remake with a different way to collect all the items, a visually pleasing game for the console, especially compared to the GBA before then, and a compelling story with a great short film that changes the story of Mega Man X. Today we are talking about the sequel that came out a year later, Mega Man X2 for the SNES in 1994. Sequels are interesting to talk about because most of the time a sequel can be better than the original game. With Mega Man 1 and 2, it was no denying that it was better than the original, but when we go from 2 to 3 is when you realize that sequels can be either really good or not that good. Mega Man X2 is one I hear is good, but not as good as the original. Now, you can think what you want to think with Mega Man X2, but personally, I think X2 is great, with great levels to run through and bosses that are fun to fight. But some things I think weren't well done as they should have been. Now let's get on with the review. The story of Mega Man X2 begins where the first game left off. For a recap, X has defeated Sigma, but at the cost of Zero's life. In this game, it begins with an exposition telling us that it's been 6 months since the defeat of Sigma. In the last 6 months, X and his crew have been hunting down the remaining Mavericks who pledged loyalty to Sigma. 3 loyal Sigma followers called the X Hunters, whose names are Sarah, Violin, and Agile, have realized that X is just too powerful and they need to accelerate their plans of bringing back Sigma and Zero. They send out 8 new Mavericks for X to defeat. When X defeats 2 of their Mavericks, they challenge X directly, each of them holding a part of Zero. If X can defeat them, then he will get Zero back, but if they win, Zero will be brought back as the number for the Mavericks. X is willing to take on the challenge and get his best friend back with the help of Dr. Kane to rebuild Zero. Now, this game does have more story and a better cutscene presentation than the previous game, and it's in an NES game. I made it clear that stories from the 8-bit and 16-bit eras of consoles didn't have much story unless you were an RPG like Chrono Trigger, but I am genuinely surprised that X2 has more story in showing that story than the usual SNES game. The soundtrack for Mega Man X2 is something to behold. In my Metroid video, I said I don't listen to that many 8-bit or 16-bit arrangements unless it was a Mega Man game. Well, Mega Man X2 is the exception because I am not a fan of this OST. I think it sounds whiny most of the time, like with Flame Stag, but there are some good ones I can't deny sound really good. The graphical side of Mega Man X2 is no different than Mega Man X1. Back in my Metroid review, I said that Capcom really knew how to take advantage of the SNES hardware to make some of the best looking games on the system. But by the SNES, Nintendo knew how to make visually appealing games like Super Mario World. Though at the time, they were also beaten by companies that took advantage of the hardware like Rare. Mega Man X1 looks really good, and when I was saying that, I meant all the X games on the SNES, X1, X2, and X3, though personally, I think Mega Man and Base beats the X games out of the water, but the X games still hold up pretty well to this day. The game had to change much in terms of control. Mega Man is based off of jumping and shooting to the goal. In X1, they added wall jumping, which can be useful, and dashing, which was locked behind an army piece, which you can't really miss. In X2, you played the same as in X1, but with one change, you can now use the dash without the leg part. I think this is for the better. In Mega Man X1, the dash wasn't necessary for all the stages except for Chill Penguin since it was mandatory to grab that item. But in X2, you could get it at the start and they make the levels feel more fast-paced than the original, and I think it's for the better. From X2 onwards, the dash is not tied to the armor pieces, but other than that change, there isn't much to say on the gameplay side of Mega Man X2. Now, the item game in X2 is something else. In Mega Man X1, there were only 2 backtracks, and one of those backtracks was a heart tank, so it wasn't worthwhile. And the other was an endgame upgrade, which in my opinion isn't really worth the hassle. In Mega Man X2, you can beat the entire game without a single backtrack. So when you're going in the boss order, Wheel Gator, Bubble Crab, Flame Stag, Morph Moth, Magma Centipede, Crystal Snail, Overdrive Ostrich, and Wire Sponge, there are at least 2 backtracks. But in this game, I decided to think about what stages you get all the items without special weapons. So that means that you can do Crystal Snail, Wire Sponge, Bubble Crab, and Flame Stag, and get all the upgrades without needing any special weapons. For the others, you need 4 special weapons: Flame Stag Speed Burner, Wire Sponge's Strike Chain, Wheel Gator Spin Wheel, and Crystal Snail's Crystal Hunter. And these can be used in unique ways. With the Strike Cane, you can get the arm parts early instead of needing the foot parts, which negate the backtrack. In Bubble Crab, you can just jump consistently on the water to get the sub-tank. In Magma Centipede, you need Flame Stag's weapons to get the upgrade. For the order I did for this video was Wire Sponge, Wheel Gator, Flame Stag, Overdrive Ostrich, Crystal Snail, Bubble Crab, Morph Moth, and Magma Centipede. It doesn't have to be this order, just do any of the 4 I mentioned that didn't need any weapons or upgrades to get all the sub-tanks or heart tanks. Now, let's talk about the armor parts and special weapons. In Mega Man X1, you could grab the armor parts that would make life easier for you, like reduced damage and an extra charge shot. In X2, I would say it had the second best armor set in the series, so let's talk about it in the order you would get it in the least backtracking run I did. First, we have the arm parts. These are the best arm parts in the series, and only one game in the X series has come close to topping it. The arm parts in X2 can blast 2 charge shots that completely bypass invisibility frames, doing massive damage on all enemies and bosses, making the most fun weapon to use in X2. The foot parts are quite useful, with the ability to air dash, which can be really useful like in the section of the X Hunter stage. The head parts is one I don't really use, cause I have no need to look for secret areas and they don't contribute that much to getting upgrades. Finally, the body parts, which reduce damage, which is really good, but they also have a Giga Attack, which I think having a Giga Attack was a good idea. I just don't use it outside of the second Sergei's fight. Overall, I like this armor set, but I don't like the special weapons in this game. This is probably the worst set of special weapons in the series, and they weren't useful in combat all that much. I only really use the ones you need to get upgrades like the Spin Wheel and Flame Stag Speed Burner. That's about it. The bosses in X2 are fun to fight without their weaknesses. The ones that are the most fun are Wire Sponge, Flame Stag, Morph Moth, and Magma Centipede. Wheel Gator has the annoying swimming in blood, I think is that what the liquid is, but it's not a big deal. Overdrive Ostrich, Sonic Slicers are near impossible to dodge. Crystal Snail can be annoying with going into his shell, and Bubble Crab has his bubble, but that's about it. In these stages you can find the X-Hunters, Sergei's, Violent, and Agile. Sergei is fun to fight with you needing to dodge his shots. Violent I personally find annoying with his ball and chain with you not having enough time to dodge it. Agile is fun as well with you needing to dodge his sword slashes and sword beams. Once you defeat each X-Hunter, you get a part for 0, and once you get all 3 parts you are guaranteed the good ending. But you have to go out of your way to find where they are hiding, and it feels rewarding since you are looking for them, and once you find them, you get something out of it. Now it is time for the end game, where we go to the X-Hunter's base, where we fight Violin, Sergei's, and Agile for a second time. Violin was less annoying because you stand near or far from him depending on the blocks where they position and not get hurt much. Sergei's, I used a Giga Attack to get rid of the first phase, then used the charged Sonic Slicers below him to just whittle away at his health. Now for Agile, I can't tell you because it's stage 3, you can take a shortcut using the Crystal Hunter. If you use the Air Dash and Charge Speed Burner unharmed when you get through it, hug the left wall until you find a capsule that gives you the Street Fighter move I do not know the name to, which can one-shot any boss in one hit, which I did here. Now we move on to the final stage, where it is literally just Magma Centipede stage, just reused. Then we reach Sigma, who says he brought back Zero, but... ultimately, Zero opens the path to lead us to Sigma, where we get to a fun Phase 1 and a somewhat dragged on Phase 2. For this phase, I tried to not use the Street Fighter move till the last bit, where I couldn't take it anymore. Now the day was saved, X and Zero live on to fight another day, ending Mega Man X2. Mega Man X2 is a game I think is good, but not the best it could be. Some of the bosses could have been designed better, the music was a little too whiny for my liking, and the head and armor parts weren't really all that useful in the grand scheme of things, even compared to the foot parts and arm parts. Now, do I hate this game? No, I love this game. This is my third most replayed X game behind X1 and X4. I love the arm parts, like I said. Half the bosses, the finale, and I think the game is fun to speed through and do no backtracking runs. Now, I do think that X1 is the better game, but X2 is a game to slouch on, in my opinion. Now that two games are covered, the next video is going to be a mystery because, yes. If you liked today's video, consider leaving a like and subscribe for more. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Letterboxd, link in the description. Until then, I'm Avatar Aiden, and I will see you next time.